All right, welcome back. So we're going to move on to lesson number 2, or the tactic problem number 2 that you had a chance to solve. So before we actually get into the problem, I'm just showing a general theme here that happened a couple moves before the problem starts. Is that when in the Grunfeld, since black is basically just worse in a strategic point of view, he has to be very direct in terms of looking for counterplay because if he plays slowly, white will consolidate his position and have a big center. So white has just played queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7. And black certainly does not want to waste time with a move like b6 because after e3, white is completing his development and he just looks better to me. I don't really see a great way for black to increase the pressure. Maybe he can sort of get away with it and it's not the end of the world, but realistically, this is not the way you play the Grunfeld. You play the Grunfeld to be active, and there's a better way. So black strikes white center with the move c5, aiming to counterattack white center while he's underdeveloped, which is a real core theme of the Grunfeld. So the game continues, queen takes b7, and now black, instead of playing knight bd7, which would just leave him in an awful position after c takes d5, he gives his rook for the moment with the move queen b6. Now white probably shouldn't take the rook. His best move is likely to take on b6. And he has a few options here, but none of them lead to an advantage because black's lead in development, which now is even bigger because of the rook on a8 being suddenly active, is more than enough to balance the game. For instance, one sample line could run d takes c5, b c5. Now white has to pay attention to d4 and d takes c4 with all the pawns hanging. He can try something like this and taking everything. But after e6 at the end, white is 2 pawns up for the moment, but he will lose both of them. The a and b pawns should fall very easily because they're just being attacked so quickly, and there's not really anything he can do about it. So this certainly is not a concern. It should be a draw pretty promptly, though I think if anyone has to be precise, it's probably white. In any case, that's neither here nor there because what happened in this one is white is taking the rook. Now, it's a bad move, but still, oftentimes in an opening, you'll, especially if you've prepared reasonably well, your opponent will make some move that you hadn't checked, and it's just not good. And at that point, you don't know what the best move is, but you know you have a good position, you have to find it. And that's sort of where these almost opening kind of tactics are coming from. And here, indeed, black has a very good position because white's queen is trapped. But he has to be very intelligent about the way he chooses to trap this queen. So the most natural move and the most typical one is knight to c6, but this is wrong. Because after knight c6, white has a very important resource. He can play the move d takes c5, counterattacking black's queen on b6. And black's queen has nowhere good to go. In the event of queen takes b2, the white queen can escape to c6. In the event of queen takes c5, the white queen escapes to b7. And if queen a6, yes, the white's queen is now still trapped. But white has taken more material and he's kicked the black queen to a very inconvenient square. He now goes queen takes f8 check and say king takes f8. He's able to take on d5. At this point, white has a lot of material. He's got 2 rooks and 3 pawns for the queen. So he's got a big material advantage and black has to try to fight back. His best try is knight takes d5. But unfortunately for black after this, white has another tactic at his disposal, which basically ends the game, which is e4. Opening up the bishop on f1 and trading and winning the bishop on d5. And I don't even think it's so much about winning the bishop on d5 because white already had a decisive material advantage. It's more about removing one of the pieces that black was using to try to do something horrible to white before he could complete his development. And here, as far as I can tell, black has just lost. So knight c6 does not work. The next thing you might want to try is knight to a6. But as it turns out, so the next thing you might want to try is knight to a6. But it turns out this isn't quite ideal either. It's still very decent for black, but white has a nice resource here that's very important. He can play knight a4 to attack black's queen on b6 and force her to move. And she doesn't have anywhere great to go that will keep white's queen trapped. The game might continue queen a5 check. Now, of course, white does not want to block the check with a nonchalant move because his queen is hanging on a8 for dead nothing. So he should block with the bishop. And now he's still a rook up. After queen takes a4, it's down to an exchange. But now white has a very important move, queen takes a7, which saves his queen and also pins the knight on a6, making it hard to get back in the game. There's no doubt that black still has very reasonable compensation here due to his lead in development, but it's not that convincing, and I think white is sort of okay. It's just a messy position where both sides have their chances. This was better, much better than knight c6, because black's lead in development still counts. But going back, the actual best move is knight b to d7. And here we see the same idea. The queen is hanging, and there's nowhere for her to go. Much like knight a6, in both cases, d takes c5 is well met by knight takes c5 when the black queen is able to remain on b6, shutting the white queen out and winning her. And if white takes on f8 or something, like, these positions are always awful, just because with equal material and white's so far behind on development, he's going to really struggle with all of black's threats, like c takes d4, queen takes b2. All of these moves are coming in, and white's badly underdeveloped. He's really in bad shape, considering material is close-ish to equal. The critical try is knight a4. Much like the last variation, where white is trying to overwork the black queen and get a place for his own queen to get out. But unfortunately for black, or for white, excuse me, the variation is a bit different, because now, after queen to a5 check, bishop to d2, queen takes a4, the white queen is hanging, but this time the knight's on d7 instead of a6, which means that queen takes a7 is not possible. White has to play queen b7, and after rook b8, the queen has to come to c7, and now white's really falling behind. That rook is going to land on b2, and white is essentially lost here. He's, if you compare this to the position with the knight on a6, he's down 2 tempi and an extra pawn, and that position was unclear, and this one is completely crushing. Black can try something like d takes c4. He's ready for knight d5. He's ready for rook takes b2, and white is just in awful shape. So I think this is a very typical tactical idea that you'll see in the Grunfeld, trying to blast open the center while white is still underdeveloped. If you look at this position materially, I mean, strategically, I guess you could call it white's just winning. He's up material and everything, but just bishop on f1 and rook on h1 are just not participating, and the point is that black will win the game before those guys can join the fight. In any case, I think that will do it for lesson 2, and then I will see you for the next tactic.